Welcome to Hey, it's CarlyRae's Book Club. This is Book Editing 101, where editors join me to chat all about editing. From tips to tricks, I got you covered. Today, editor at the Parliament House Press, Sophia DeSensi, joins me to discuss the different stages of editing, from developmental editing to line editing to copy editing. What readers may not know is that a book undergoes many revisions, allowing the character, setting, and dialogue to become that much more vibrant. We'll find out more right after this. Sophia, tell us where you're joining us from.
Hi, I'm coming from Jupiter, Florida.
Now, for those that watched the first video in the editing series, What is Editing? You already know Sophia, but for those who are just joining in with us, Sophia, tell them a little bit about yourself.
So I'm an editor at the Parliament House Press, and I work exclusively in the young adult and new adult speculative fiction range. I have my master's in writing popular fiction and a bachelor's in creative writing and medical anthropology.
Now, you have worked in the editing industry since 2020, so you already know an author doesn't just write a book like what you see on the shelf the very first time. Tell viewers what the very first stage of editing is.
So the very first stage of editing is developmental edits, where you're going to look at the overall structure of the plot, the world building elements, magic system, if it's applicable, voice, point of view. You want to make sure that the point of view and the tense matches with the genre convention and the intention of the novel. And we'll also work on GMC and pacing.
Now tell us, what is GMC?
GMC is goal, motivation, and conflict. So typically you will have a GMC for the overall plot, what your character wants to achieve and what they're struggling with. And then you'll have scene level, chapter level GMCs within. So chapters are kind of like, like they have a mini arc. So you'll have a GMC within the scene and then overall, and those are all developmental areas.
Okay. Now, can an author choose not to follow a developmental edit?
I guess that they could technically. Usually when you're working with an editor, we go over all those major revisions with the author and we come to a conclusion that makes the author happy as well, because as the editor, it's not our job to tell the author what they want to do with the book. It really is to enhance their intention for the story. So we're not there to change things unnecessarily. We're only there to improve upon your vision.
Now, how many times does a manuscript undergo a developmental edit?
So this can depend based on the necessary improvements. I would say typically it would be 2 to 3 months for a developmental edit, but it also depends on the editor's schedule and the author's schedule and what they feel comfortable revising. And that's all something that you're going to discuss with your editor and come to a conclusion that's comfortable for you both and achievable.
Yeah. Now, how long would you say it takes to complete a well-executed developmental edit on a manuscript? I know you just said it could take a couple months. So does like the author write the book and then the editor works with it on their own for a few months?
Yes. So typically how I revise a manuscript when I'm working on developmentals, they'll work on it for a specific amount of time. Then it gets sent to me and I typically take 4 to 5 weeks per edit. And then I hand it back to them. And then based on the necessary improvements, it could be a month, 2 months, 3 months. It just depends on what the author feels comfortable that they can handle. And then, if we need to do a second round, we'll do that then. So it's really a flexible schedule that depends on, your position and your editor relationship.
Mm-hmm. Now, after developmental edit is complete, what is the next stage of editing that an author and editor move on to?
So after developmental editing, you're going to go into line editing, which is what people really think about when they think about writing. And that's the prose, the style, the voice, things like that. There are aspects that do overlap, as in the pacing of the story that can really be improved through line edits. But that's also a big developmental area too. So that's something that you'll look at twice.
Mm-hmm. Now, what is the main purpose of a line edit? Is this sharpen dialogue? I know you mentioned pacing.
Yes. So yeah, pacing is one of the areas that you're going to improve. It's also really dives into the word choice that you use, the language. For example, if it's a first person story, you want to make sure that those thoughts are very intimate and with your character, and then also specific with their personality. So, the verbiage that a 12-year-old boy uses compared to an 18-year-old girl is going to be very different. And this also reflects their education style, the culture that they grew up in, things like that. And that also benefits tone as well. So if you're having a really like highly dramatic scene, you want to make sure that your word choice you're using in those sentences reflect the tone of the scene. So line edits, you're really going through every single word with like a fine-tooth comb, and looking at those kind of things. Also, a big aspect in line editing is dialogue, making sure that you have very like realistic and catchy dialogue. Dialogue is one of the hardest parts because people think that you want to write dialogue very realistically, but actually you're kind of writing it not realistically to seem realistic, because a lot of times when we're speaking conversationally, we don't need to see that in the book. So we're only seeing like the most important parts. So a lot of that will be cut and trimmed during the line edits.
Mm-hmm. Now, does a line edit take as long as a developmental edit? Why or why not?
So I think at the when you're going through the line edits, that's going to take a little bit longer because you are looking at every single word choice, the sentence structure, your punctuation, all of those, and that can get really nitpicky and take a long time. But I don't think in the long run it takes as long as the developmental edits, because you could be working on developmental edits for 6 months, possibly. Line edits, you might only go through it a few months, but it might take you longer hours spent going through that manuscript, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like you have to go through each line still in a line edit.
Yeah, so it can take longer to do the work, but it's probably a shorter amount of time you're going to be working on the line edits.
Yeah, gotcha. Because there's only so many times you can reread the same dialogue.
Right.
Now, do you prefer developmental editing or line editing?
I really like line editing. I think there's something really special about, using your words and prose to enhance the story. And that's kind of like the fundamental part of writing. So it's really fun for me to work on line edits and think about word choice and help the author like realize what they can do with their prose.
Yeah. Now, after developmental edit comes the line edit, and then the last stage is the copy edit. Tell viewers what a copy edit is.
Yes. So copy edits are typically done by a specific editor after you go through line edits and developmental edits with your main editor. It'll get handed off to a copy editor. And it's a very specific job, and I think one of the hardest in the industry because there's a lot of research involved and it's very, very nitpicky. So for example, if your character is wearing flip-flops in the beginning of the chapter and sneakers in the end of the chapter, they're going to catch that. But then it can even be even deeper. Let's say your character's working in a garden and they pick a tomato. Well, it's the copy editor's job to make sure that the season is right for this tomato and the environment, so we have to look at where the story is being written. And if tomatoes aren't typically grown there, then they need to suggest an alternative vegetable in that garden. So it's very nitpicky like that. If it's historical fiction, they're going to make sure that the language is concurrent with that year. We might have used a term that wasn't invented at that time or used during that specific time period. So it's their job to like catch all those tiny like nitpicky things.
Now, in all these stages, is there a team of editors working with the author, or does one editor go through each stage? I know you mentioned there's a separate copy editor, but do they work with one editor for both developmental and the line editing?
So typically in the traditional field, you'll work with one editor for developmental and line edits, and then a separate editor for copy edits. But occasionally at the smaller presses, you may work with a different editor for developmental and line edits.
Now, are all these stages, such as developmental editing, line editing, copy editing, are they completed in one revision, or are there multiple times they go through like each revision?
Yes, so it goes through multiple revisions. You'll focus on the big picture elements first, and then once all your structure elements are down, you've chosen a specific point of view, tense, things like that. then you'll go into line edits once you feel comfortable, you and your editor feel comfortable with the progression of that. So yes, otherwise I feel like it would be way too much to focus on developmental and line edits. And then also I like to use this like metaphor as if you're a painter, you know, like you wouldn't paint the painting before you sketched it, you know? So I feel like developmental edits are you sketching the work, and then the line edits are you painting it.
Okay, I like that analogy. Anything else you want to add about the different stages of editing? Any editing books you recommend viewers check out?
Yes. So I named a few in the last video that I think are still really great. Self-editing for fiction writers, which focuses on prose and style. But there's also another one that I would love to mention, The Magic Words, which goes into genre conventions in young adult and children's fiction. So if you're interested in those genres, but you're not sure exactly what the conventions are, this really goes into detail of those, and I think it's really beneficial.
Yeah. Well, there you have it. I also put all the links of where you can get the books in the description below. You just heard about the different stages of editing. Now, Sophia, before I let you go, tell viewers where they can find you on social media.
You can find me at Sophia DeSensi on Twitter and Instagram, and my website is www.authorSophiaDeSensi.com.
Well, that concludes the second episode of Editing 101 with editor at the Parliament House Press, Sophia DeSensi. Stay tuned for more episodes where we will discuss things such as why self-editing is important and if all these stages in editing are ones that you should go through before coring. And in the meantime, you can follow me, HeyitsCarlyRae, on social media, Sophia, and all of my links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day. And remember, be yourself always.
Bye.